Virgo. Yes. It's just the outside.
You're live, though. Hi. We're still linked. Very good.
I just said it's all material because I have to know where it's coming from.
I don't know.
Though some of us know where it's coming from.
Hello, welcome to Glenview New Church online service today. Hopefully you can all hear me well. Our internet was down, so through the modern day technology, I rigged up some things here, and you're watching me through my laptop right now with a nice microphone. So hopefully you can hear me. If you can't, you can chat on the side. I can see your YouTube chat. And that being said, too, if I get cut off, or please chat or text me. I have both those devices up front, so I know that you're not getting me anymore. But as of now, it looks like things are going wonderfully, so thank you, Lord. Today we're talking about getting rid of worms. Hopefully none of this technology will worm its way in to fight with our spirituality this morning. We're talking about how we let the lower things of this life get into our heads, and how we let them come up and mess with our spiritual mind. For the children, we're going to be looking at a story in Matthew and realizing all the wonderful things we actually do for the Lord on this earth and don't even know it. And then for the adult portion of the service, we're going to look into a story in Genesis about Abraham and Lot, or Abram and Lot, and how them separating and taking over the land actually showed, in its internal sense, shows us something about our topic today. So now, if you'll all join me, I'm going to go open the Word and say the Lord's Prayer. And if you can't hear me, just go ahead and say the prayer. I think you'll see when I'm saying the prayer, and you can say it along with me. I'll come back up here for our recitation. Great. The Lord is good to all, and his tender mercies are over all his works. Oh, come, let's worship and bow down. Let's kneel before the Lord, our Maker. Thank you, Lord, for bringing us all together to think about your word and to think about how we can make things better. Sometimes just realizing that we can make a difference is our best cure. It is wonderful that you always seek to inspire us and give us joy. Amen. Let us say your prayer. Our Father, who art in the heavens, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, as in heaven, so upon the earth. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we also forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. O Lord, forgive us our trespasses.
As we forgive those who trespass against us.
Amen. Let's see what we have here. Okay. People say the sound is better. Good. So for some of you that get the congregational emails, you've been sent a recitation and a hymn that we will sing later. The recitation is, I'll just say it for you and then we'll repeat it again. Come you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. So we can all heard that. If we didn't get the email, maybe we can all try to say that together right now, today. Here we go. It's from Matthew 25, the story we're going to read for the kids. Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. Very good. So hello, children watching. I hope you like this view. And look at this fancy mic I have here that you can see now so you can hear me better. And this beautiful window we have behind us. Sometimes in our broadcasts, in our online broadcasts, you can't see that window very well, but you can see even more of it now. And that window in itself tells a story like we're going to tell today. It's a river that leads up to a place that looks like Mount Sinai. It's a big mountain. It's a river of truth that leads up to where the Lord is. That's what that window is. And we're going to find out that all these wonderful things we do in our lives lead to the Lord, and we didn't even know it maybe. So we're going to look through our story, Matthew chapter 25. And of course, Matthew is one of the Gospels, which means this story is about Jesus Christ talking to people. He said a lot of important things. And this is something he said about when people, really sounded like to them about when people died and what happened to them, or what would happen when they met the Lord. But it also means something for us right now, today, when we're alive and we're doing all the things we do during the day. And it's about sheep and goats. It's about sheep and goats. So here's what Jesus said to the people. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And a shepherd is someone who takes care of a flock. So this shepherd is going to separate the sheep and the goats so they don't intermingle. He will put the sheep on his right, which to you would be maybe this way, right? And the goats on his left. To me, that's this, but maybe to you it's that, right? Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world." Doesn't that sound familiar? That was the recitation we just said. Now listen to this. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. Oh, thank you for inviting me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. Then the righteous will answer him, So he said that people do all those things. And what do you think the people are going to say? The righteous people said, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you? The king will truly reply. Of course, the king is the Lord. Truly, I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. Amen. And then he goes on to talk a little bit about the goats, and how the goats are the ones that don't do those things for other people, and how they get their own reward, a bad one, a reward of punishment. But the Lord wanted to tell the good people all that information. And what does that mean for us? What do you kids at home, or teens, or adults even, think that means for us? What would that mean? What would that mean for us? Well, first, he said he was hungry and that we gave him something to eat. I've never met Jesus in person and fed him any food. But you know what I have done, and I've seen other people do, is share food. Almost everyone does that, right? Moms and dads and all kinds of people buy food and give it to their families, and even a lot of time invite people that aren't even from their direct family into their house to eat a meal. So I guess what the Lord was saying is, if we share, maybe not just food, but share anything with other people, then we feed them. And if we feed another person by sharing a toy, or sharing some of our knowledge, or sharing something like that, then I guess the things we're doing on this world are really helping the Lord. And I've never given the Lord something to drink physically, but I was thinking, in our teachings, it says water signifies or means truth. And have any of you at home ever told the truth? Yes, you've told the truth. And if you tell the truth, that's like you giving someone a drink, isn't it? I guess it is. And if you've told the truth, especially when it was hard, you've given someone a big, delicious glass of ice water. And telling the truth is also doing something for the Lord. What else have we done? Have we ever clothed the Lord? Maybe not. But you know what helps clothe the Lord? Is a nice prayer. The Lord likes lots of things around him that are good deeds, but our prayers are kind of like outer clothing for the Lord. It brings us to see him better and to like him more and to do good things for him. So I guess we have clothed him anytime we prayed or anytime that we've thought something nice about him. What are some other ones? Have you ever helped the Lord when he was a stranger? No, but I guess we have helped strangers in our life, nice strangers. Maybe someone who was lost, we've helped them find their way. Or maybe someone we didn't know at school, another child in our class, we have said hello to and talked to them about something we like, and they've talked to us in return because of that, because we didn't treat them like a stranger. And when we do that to our neighbor or someone we know, that's like the Lord, helping the Lord out. making them feel included, right? There's also someone, well, of course, when people are sick, if anyone's hurt, I hope we all go rush and help them. And that's like helping the Lord. And the one about a person in prison, that's an interesting one too. Have we ever seen someone, maybe that we did know, who was sad or sitting in the corner of a room all by themselves? Have we ever gone and asked them how they were, or seen if we could help them in some way? Well, if we've done that, then it's like we've visited the Lord in prison, because when we have bad thoughts or feel too lonely or too sad, it's like we're in a prison, isn't it? It's like not very fun. So when we go visit someone who's in a bad way and help them, that's like helping the Lord. Isn't that amazing that although the Lord, right after he says, these are what my sheep do, he says, lists off these things that you've done for him. He said, you've already done these things for me. You've already gone out and helped me with that. Did we ever think about that? That all those things that we just listed off are things that we do for the Lord. And especially when we do them and think about the Lord and think about how much he loves us and wants us to be good and happy people, that brings all those things up to him, and he's so happy. And then we're like his sheep. So today, I would just like you to think about how wonderful that is. The Lord gives us all these opportunities to be his sheep, to be good, humble people that do good things for other people, and that when we do those things, we're helping the Lord. And for our project today, let me grab this. Now, we're going to sing a song. I'm going to do a blessing. We're going to sing a song, and there's going to be an interlude. And then the kids, if they want to, while the parents keep listening, can do this project. Get a piece of paper. Doesn't have to be this big. And fold it in half this way, long way, right? And what you're going to do is you're going to paint with crayons or with pencils, colored pencils, or markers, or whatever you have on hand. You're going to draw a picture of angelic things here. Angels, and maybe anything you think is in heaven you could draw here. Maybe even trees, right? Maybe there's an angel and trees in heaven. And on this side, you're going to draw things that are on this earth, like cars or candy, maybe a soda pop or a fountain drink. You're going to draw whatever you want to draw. Draw a hole, make all the stuff on this side of earthly stuff, and all this side in heaven. All this side, heavenly stuff. All right? And then there's a little trick we're going to do. So take your time and take a long time drawing heaven on one side and the earth on the other. And then you're going to cut your sheet of paper right down that middle where you folded it, and get a piece of tape. And guess which one's going to go on top? Guess which one's going to go on top? The heaven one, right? You're going to put the heaven up top and the earth stuff down below, so that the heavenly stuff is on top and the earth stuff is down below. And then you have a nice, long little mural that you can hang on the wall or on the fridge or somewhere in your house or in the window. And that's going to show you what goes on top, right? What's the important part? The Lord and his heavens and the earth below. And when we do good things in the earth, it helps heaven up top. So that's your project, to remember that heaven's on top and earth is below, and do that project. So I hope you enjoy that little task today, and I hope you all do it, okay? Now we're going to say a blessing. Please bow your heads. May the angels keep charge over you in all of your ways. Amen. So now we start the more adult-focused side of our service. And we start our readings today from Genesis chapter 13 that talks about Abram and Lot. Abram has already come down from the Chaldeans, down from up north, way above where the children of Israel finally made their home and reached their peak during King Solomon. But this is way before that. Abram, by the Lord asking him to come down, came down into the land of Canaan, and then he went down into Egypt. And in the teachings of the new church, it says that Egypt is that place where we collect memory knowledges. And Egyptians at this time in the Old Testament, it says that in our teachings, they mostly correspond the bad side of gaining knowledge. So think about how the Egyptians, as smart and wonderful and amazing as they were, I mean, the pyramids, people still are trying to figure out how they built those. So they definitely had a lot of intelligence. But what did they use that intelligence for? They used it for multiple gods. So we know through hieroglyphics and all the rest that we see that they worship many, many gods. And so that wouldn't be what kind of the reasons we should use our intelligence isn't for many, many gods or things of this earth. The reason we're supposed to use our intelligence is for the Lord. So that's a good backdrop to what the story is. So we know kind of a setting for this. And then Abram went up from Egypt, he and his wife, and all that he had, and Lot with him to the south. Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver, and in vessels of gold. And he went on his journey from the south as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning between Bethel and Ai. So before he went to Egypt, he built an altar, and he's back there again. And there Abram called on the name of the Lord. Lot also, who went with Abram, had flocks and herds and tents. Now the land was not able to support them both, that they might dwell together, for their possessions were so great that they could not dwell together. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. The Canaanites and the Perizzites then dwelt in the land. So Abram said to Lot, "Please let there be no strife between me and you, and between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brothers. Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If you take the left, then I will go to the right. Or if you go to the right, then I will go to the left." And Lot lifted his eyes and saw all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. Like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt as you go toward Zoar. Then Lot chose for himself all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated from each other. Abram dwelt in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent even as far as Sodom. And the Lord said to Abram, after Lot had separated from him, "Lift your eyes now and look from the place where you are, northward, southward, eastward, and westward. For all the land which you see I give to you and your descendants forever. And I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth, so that if a man could number the dust of the earth, then your descendants also could be numbered. Arise, walk in the land through its length and width, for I give it to you." Then Abram moved his tent and went and dwelt by the terebinth trees of Mamre, which are in Hebron, and built an altar there to the Lord. Amen. There's a nice little story, and we can just think of examples in our own life right now about how sometimes it's smart to separate. Sometimes when we're arguing, it's good to get a break from each other before we come back together. And of course, later on, Abram and Lot would come back together and work as a team again later on in a different kind of way. So what is this story telling us? It tells us that simple message on the face, but there is a deeper spiritual message to this story that helps us organize our minds to better see how the Lord operates with us, in us, all around us. But I can't help first think of a passage from the writings, from the teachings of our church, that kind of tells this overall story. Because, of course, everything that Abram and Lot were doing, they had to do themselves, but who was really in charge? What was really going on? There's a number in Apocalypse Explained from the teachings of our church, from Apocalypse Explained, number 115, that has a beautiful overall kind of mirrored message as the story we just read. It talks about divine providence. The operation of divine providence is like a gardener, collecting the seeds of shrubs, fruit trees, and flowers of all kinds, and acquiring spades, rakes, and other tools for working the land, and then fertilizing that garden, digging it, dividing it into beds, putting in the seeds, and smoothing the surface. All these things a person must do as if from the person. But it is the Lord who causes the seeds to take root, to spring forth out of the earth, to shoot forth leaves, and then into blossoms, and finally to yield new seeds for the benefit of the gardener. Unless a person provides the necessary things for a garden, the person will have no garden with the benefit of its fruits. So it is with reformation, which is reforming, taking bad things and getting rid of them and bringing in good things. A person must provide himself or herself with knowledges of truth and good from the Word, from the doctrine of the church, from the world, and by the person's own labor. The Lord does everything else while the person is ignorant of it. Those knowledges of truth and good with the person are nothing but materials and have no life in them until a person does them or lives according to them as if of self. When that is done, the Lord vivifies and reforms. Such a garden is a person's understanding, for therein is a person's wisdom, which derives from love. Derives from love all that it is. So isn't that a beautiful thought? So this whole story, actually the whole story of the Old Testament and most of the New Testament is like that gardener story. It's the Lord. It seems as though people like Moses or Abram or Joseph or Solomon or David or whoever we put in there, it seems like they're doing all this work, and they are. They're doing it as of self. But in the Old Testament, when the children of Israel are really at their best, is when the people in charge are doing it as of self, but for the Lord. For the Lord. When you do it as of self, for the Lord and good things in mind, or the neighbor in mind, that's when the Lord gives things life. Fascinating. So we continue reading from the book Secrets of Heaven. another book, the teachings of our church, we can look into the story of Abraham and Lot, or Abram and Lot. So we heard in that story early about silver and gold, vessels of silver and gold, we could think of it as that. And it says in our teachings, those mean factual knowledges of what is true. That's the silver. And gold means factual knowledge of what is good. And then, of course, I told you earlier that false factual knowledge is meant by the Egyptians. And I told you why. Because they used all their knowledge for many gods and for things of this earth. Whereas when the children of Israel or people in the past who've used true things from the world to point towards one God, that was a good thing. That made those truths good. So we're talking about that factual knowledge. Things you pick up from this world. Sometimes in some of our translations, they call them memory knowledges, which is things that you pick up that are of this earth, and they're like we said earlier, they're just material. What are you going to do with all this stuff that you pick up in this world? What use they are put to and then made to serve is what determines which of these they become. The facts a person knows are like the wealth and riches he possesses. Wealth and riches in the hands of those governed by evil are ruinous because they put them to evil kinds of use. Whereas wealth and riches in the hands of those governed by good are advantageous because they put them to good kinds of uses. Therefore, if wealth and riches in the hands of evil people are handed over to those who are good, they become good. So too with factual knowledges. For this reason, many known facts can be learned from those who are steeped in evils and falsities and put to good kinds of use, thus becoming good. Interesting. So this is saying, just like those spades and all those tools that a gardener got, that all the knowledge we gain in this earth, even if it's from a bad person, even if it at some point had a bad goal, a bad end to it, when we take it and look at it and use it for good, we have turned those facts, that knowledge, into something that's working for the Lord. There's so many examples we can think of here, I'm sure. We know there are many people in business that aren't necessarily really looking out for the consumer. They're actually looking for the bottom dollar. They want to make money, and the consumer is a means to the end of money. So if we are working at a job where our goal is just to create more money, we might want to examine ourselves and see if that's truly what we should be driven by. Should we be driven by the dollar bill? We might also see in some other jobs, whatever it is, that we're driven by something else that isn't good for the neighbor or the Lord. And that's for us to decide in lots of ways, isn't it? Sometimes it's hard to know if something is good or evil. But we must consider it and think about what is truly good for humanity. What is really going to impact people in a way that brings them up and that doesn't bring them down. So it turns out too, in business, often there's many people who have seen the consumer, the neighbor, in its most earthly way of putting it, as the goal. That's why we hear things like, the customer is always right. Those kind of ideas start overlapping towards something that is not considering money as its end, but something that can really help people. Many of our great millionaires and billionaires along the last 100 years have probably made a lot of their money because they were looking to how they could take a product and make it cheaper and easier for people to get. And not that that is a good or bad thing necessarily, just like we said earlier, it's material. But if they were doing that with the idea of something of love for the neighbor or for the Lord, then we can imagine that some of them hopefully are in heaven today. Whereas if they were doing that just for the bottom dollar for a bill, we can imagine they might have some struggles. Anyway, that's one of our examples here. Let's continue reading a little bit. We go further into our story, and The Secrets of Heaven, number 1563. The symbolism of, and Lot also went with Abram, is the outer self and the inner self. Lot is the outer self. Abram is the inner self. And why is it important for us to know these things? Because today, before we're done, we're going to try to separate these things, get a clear image in our spirits and in our minds, so that it becomes easier for us to put things in the proper order. And it tells us this about the outer self. The plain and inevitable consequence is that the outer self, all those things of the world, will then worm its way into the inner self by secular and religious concepts incompatible with spiritual truth, and by appetites and pleasures incompatible with heavenly goodness. All the ones that focus on personal, worldly, and earthly rewards as their goals fall into this category. When we focus on them as our goals, they drag our outer self out toward the surface and downward. In this way, they distance the outer self from the inner. If these distractions are not first repelled, the inner self cannot possibly come into harmony with the outer self. So before the inner self can come into harmony with the outer self, such things must first be put aside. Okay. So we may all be thinking of someone now that we know who maybe once or as a child was a religious, caring, thoughtful person who looked to the Lord. And now probably still a caring person, but somehow secular ideas and things like that got into their heads, and they only want to see things of nature now. They don't want to hear about the Lord very much. They want to just hear about what the facts are. Okay? So this is kind of what we're talking about here, is a person who just thinks about the facts has been, although that person's still a good inner person, I'm sure, but they've let that outer self take over. They've let that outer self take over, and all the things they've heard and seen of this world be their Bible instead of the things they know from the Lord. Is there problems with that? Well, our teachings tell us there is some problems with that. If we read further, this is a kind of a good side of this. How do we take the inner self and make the outer self submit, or how do we make them one? And it talks about this kind of union that we can do with the two. It says we need to start out learning, having stimuli, learning things from seeing and hearing, and that ignites this kind of inner thought in us. So if we never had these physical bodies, our inner self would not be able to be stimulated. So we get stimulated by our outer self, and there is a union that can be made. The only true union, of course, was the Lord, who made one of his body and his spirit, his inner self and outer self. But we can have a union like that. This kind of union is what is aimed at in Abram's words here. Please let us not have strife between me and you, not between your herds and my herds. The case with the words between me and you, the goodness within us, and between my herders and your herders, the truth with us, is this. The inner self has two aspects, heavenly and spiritual, that form a unit. Just as the inner self has these aspects, the outer self does too. So what it's saying is that we have heavenly and spiritual internal self, and even our earthly self has a kind of rational or a more heavenly outer self, and a more truthful, true self, about truth self. And it goes on. The symbolism of, is the whole land not before you? talks about this. The inner self addresses the outer here. So this is the inner self addressing that outer self, and we're trying to do what we just talked about, make him a good one. The inner self addresses the outer here, but what it addresses are the features of the outer self that clash. Oh, this is a common occurrence among people who notice in themselves some evil from which they want to separate, as they do in times of spiritual trial and battle. As those who have been through such trials and battles realize, they notice discordant elements inside themselves that they cannot get away from as long as the fight continues. Nevertheless, they do still long to get away, so fervently sometimes that they grow angry with evil and try to expel it. But here it's talking about that struggle. So some of us have in our lives gone through real struggles over whether there's a God or not. And some of us have come to the conclusion in ourselves, there is a Lord. And even though these spiritual things don't always seem to line up with the natural earthly facts I know, that's just something I don't know about yet. And when we know that the Lord is on the top and the spiritual matters what really matter, it actually enlightens us in a way that opens up all that earthly information. And when something arises that seems to clash, we get angry at it, don't we? We get angry at it, as if we're having our own personal spiritual battle within us about our own selves, about something evil in ourselves. When we see the world bring up something that just doesn't seem to coincide with how we know the Lord is, it brings up these horrible battles in our minds. And if we let it take control, it's saying that outer self can worm its way in and push that inner self away. And then we get to the point where we just think we're just a person here on this earth, walking around in nature, and what we do has no spiritual end, has no spiritual ripple effect. And this the Lord is saying he's hoping that we don't go that way. And he's also really hoping for those people who have, that they feel that battle at some point and get to that point where they go, you know what? I wasn't designed to know all things of the Lord. I'm here to understand that I have a spiritual self, and those things do align with what I'm doing naturally. I will take control of my spiritual self. I'm not going to let the earth or the world tell me I am not a spiritual person. Later on in that story, it talks about how Lot looks at Jordan, and that's when the outer self looks up to the inner self and sees that it's good. Understands that without thinking this way, the world would be a very ugly place. Can you imagine what the world would be like if everyone forgot about the Lord or the neighbor or good things? So the outer self realizes that and thanks the Lord for it and looks at all the wonderful things that it has and makes them work under and for the inner self. And then later on, we hear in the same story, Abram comes back to the altar and thanks the Lord for the same way. That's when the inner self is blessed, realizes that the greatest way it works is when it works with the outer self, with that natural self. When they both work together is when it's the greatest possibility we can imagine. It's when we can get our outer selves and those thoughts that we have aligned as much as we can with our inner self. So we close today, and this is important stuff to know. These are important things to know because it aligns our minds. It actually talks in our teaching at one point about wisdom and knowledge and intelligence and the actions we do, and puts them in that order. And aligning things in your mind can really help you figure things out. So letting yourself know that you have an outer inner self, and that inner self is what loves the Lord and knows that that is true, and the outer self kind of tries to fiddle with that, is an important thought to have. But something that was mentioned earlier this week, actually, with a group of people that I was with this week. We talked about something called the affirmative principle or affirmative attitude, which our teachings talk about. And you can read about it yourself in Secrets of Heaven 2568. You could say there are two principles, one of which leads to all folly and insanity, and the other to all intelligence and wisdom. The former principle is to deny all things, or to say in the heart that we cannot believe them until we are convinced by what we can apprehend or perceive by the senses. This is the principle that leads to all folly and insanity, and it is to be called the negative principle. The other principle is to affirm the things which are of doctrine from the Word, or to think and believe within ourselves that they are true because the Lord has said them. This is the principle that leads to all intelligence and wisdom, and it is to be called the affirmative principle. The more they who think from the negative principle consult things rational, the more they consult memory or worldly knowledges, and the more they consult things philosophical, the more do they cast and precipitate themselves into darkness, until at last they deny all things. The causes of this are that no one can apprehend higher things from lower ones. That is, spiritual and celestial things, still less divine things from lower ones, because they transcend all understanding. And moreover, everything is then involved in negatives from that principle. On the other hand, they who think from an affirmative principle can confirm themselves by whatever things rational, by whatever memory or worldly knowledges, and whatever things philosophic they have at command. For all these are to them things confirmatory, and give them a fuller idea of the matter. How wonderful that reading is. To say, yeah, when you're up on top of the mountain, so to speak, and you're seeing from up there, you can see all the things below you, and you can see how they're leading to this thing. But when you're down at the bottom of the mountain, it's really hard to see the top of that mountain. So when you're down and you're letting those lower things control you, it's really hard for you to see that there's a Lord. It's really hard for you to see that there's angels and evil and good spirits around you. It's really hard to get that vantage point. Sometimes people need some help getting up that mountain. A lot of times we need that help. And these days especially, we can think about how maybe a lot of us are feeling a little confused and down at the bottom of that mountain, trying to see what's up top there. But if we use the affirmative principle and we take the story of Abram and Lot and understand that sometimes when things don't seem to line up, we need to separate them and look at them from a higher vantage point. And then if we can make those worldly things work for us, we can bring them back together. And the greatest lesson in this is what? It's that as of self part. It said, we have the power. It's truly the Lord's power, but we have control of this. We can take bad things and make them better with the help of the Lord, of course. We have an active role in this earth today, every day, to try to take those things that seem factual or memory knowledges or things we've learned or information about whatever it is, the pandemic and all those other things, and try to turn all the information we have into something that is helpful and good for people. We have power to do that. I'm by no means saying run out of your house and go hang out with people. That's not what I'm saying. That might not be the right thing that the Lord wants you to do. What I'm saying is take the information you have from wherever it comes and make it work for the Lord somehow. Find the Lord in it and with it and do something about it. Actively do something for the good. Take what you know. Those facts are just facts. They're nothing. The facts that we know are nothing unless we use them for good. When we use them for good, then they become higher things. There's a spirituality to those things, and they can lift other people up and can spread. So hopefully we all take away something good from this today. We feel uplifted. Maybe the rain will clear, maybe it won't. Whatever happens today, we're going to make things better by seeing the Lord in them, just like Abram and Lot. They had to separate the earthly stuff from the spiritual stuff in order to see it more clearly. And then they could be thankful when they could put them back together and make them all work for the Lord in an affirmative principle, affirmative attitude kind of way. So that's how you get rid of worms. The affirmative principle. Amen. Let us pray. Lord, lift this world up from its lowly state. Give us the power of 10 angels to continue fighting evil in your name. Let your words help organize our spirit to put your wisdom at top and this world's information at the bottom. Help us to separate the two and make our selfish minds bow to your power. Let all things serve you. That is the affirmative principle. Amen. Now hear the silent prayers of our hearts. Amen. May the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ be with us all. All right. Looks like a lot of comments saying thank you, Kirsten. Thanks, Elmo. Someone said donate to pantry. A lot of people said, there's the mic's working. Everything seemed to be working. There wasn't any comments that we really need to share about discussion. So everyone enjoy your Sunday, and affirmative principle, lift up those things of this world and make them work for a better purpose. Amen.